All right, let's talk about cracking the code for the DC Property Management exam. If you're looking to manage property in the nation's capital, you absolutely need a license. But here's the thing, it's not just some piece of paper. It's about really understanding the ins and outs of one of the most complex, and I mean really regulated, real estate markets in the entire country.
So you might be asking, why all the hoops to jump through? Well, it's because DC's property laws are, let's just say, unique. The Real Estate Commission requires this license to protect absolutely everyone involved. We're talking tenants and owners. They want to make sure that if you're managing property for money, you're a true professional, you're ethical, and you know those local rules like the back of your hand.
Which brings us to the big question, right? What do you actually need to know to pass this thing? Look, it's a mix of universal property management stuff and some very, very specific DC laws. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to break down exactly what you need to focus on to nail this exam.
Okay, here's our game plan. We've got 5 key areas to cover. First, just getting your license. Then we'll dive into the math. Don't worry, it's not that bad. After that, we'll tackle DC's toughest laws, which is a big one. Then, the day-to-day of managing a building. And finally, we'll pull it all together so you know exactly how to pass.
All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, getting your DC license. Before you even think about cracking a book, you gotta clear the very first hurdle, making sure you're actually eligible to apply.
So here's your basic checklist. The first few are pretty standard, right? You gotta be 18, have a high school diploma, and be able to read, write, and understand English. Simple enough? But, and this is a big but, pay really close attention to those last 2 points. If you've had an application denied recently or a license revoked, that's going to stop you in your tracks. The commission is not playing around here. They want to see a clean record before they let you manage other people's money and homes.
And listen, getting the license, that's just the beginning. To keep it, you're on the hook for 15 hours of continuing education every 2 years. And yeah, that includes mandatory courses on super important topics like fair housing and ethics. The real takeaway here is that this job in DC is never static. You have to constantly stay on top of changing laws to stay compliant. It's an ongoing commitment.
Okay, time to switch gears. Let's talk about the math. I know, but a massive part of property management is the financial side of things. And you can bet the exam is going to test you on a few core formulas that you absolutely have to know cold. First up is a big one, net operating income, or NOI. Seriously, this is one of the most important numbers in all of real estate. It basically tells you how profitable a property is before you even think about the mortgage. It's like the raw earning power of the building itself. If it's positive, great. If it's negative, well, that means a property is bleeding cash every month.
And this right here, this is exactly how the exam will throw this at you. They'll give you some numbers, rents, a vacancy rate, and you just have to follow the steps. You figure out the absolute maximum rent you could get, then you subtract what you lose to empty units to get your actual income. From there, subtract all the costs of running the place, and boom. That final number is your net operating income. You've got to get comfortable with this little dance.
Okay, next formula you've got to know, return on investment, or ROI. This one answers a very simple, very important question. For every dollar I put in, how much am I getting back each year? It's a super simple but incredibly powerful way to compare totally different investments and see which one is actually making you more money.
And here's a perfect example of why it's so useful. The exam isn't just going to ask you to crunch a number. Nope, it's going to ask you to use that number to make a smart decision. So in this case, an investor is looking at 2 different properties. You do the math for the medical office building, and you see it's giving a 13.7% return. That makes it the clear winner. It's all about applying the math to a real-world problem.
Here's another great one, operating expenses per square foot. Think of this as the ultimate tool for comparing apples to apples. It lets you look at 2 totally different sized buildings and see which one is being managed more efficiently. Like in this example, building B is bigger and has higher costs overall, right? But when you break it down per square foot, it's actually cheaper to run. That's a huge sign of good management.
All right, buckle up. We're now heading into the section of the exam that honestly trips up the most people. We're talking about the laws that are uniquely DC. And let me tell you, knowing this stuff isn't just for passing the test. It's absolutely essential for staying out of trouble when you're actually working in the city.
Let's start with rent control. This is all governed by a law from 1985. And the bottom line is, you can't just raise the rent on a whim. There's a very strict checklist you have to follow. Has it been at least a year since the last one? Is the building properly registered? Does it violate the lease? And is it within the legal limit? You have to tick every single one of those boxes. Miss one and the whole increase is invalid, period.
Next up, we have the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, better known as TOPA. You need to know this one. It is one of the most powerful tenant protection laws in the entire country. What it means in simple terms is that before a landlord can sell their building to someone else, they have to offer it to the tenants first. It gives them a real shot at buying their own homes.
And this whole TOPA thing isn't just a casual conversation. It's a formal process with a strict timeline. It all starts when the owner sends a formal offer of sale. That triggers a window for tenants to ask for more info and then declare their interest. Once they do that, a negotiation period begins. And for the exam, you've got to know the deadlines for each of these steps. They're not flexible.
Now, here's a classic mix-up. TOPA versus DOPA. They sound almost the same, but they are totally different. Just remember this. TOPA is for the tenants. DOPA is for the district. DOPA gives the city government the first right to buy certain buildings to make sure they stay affordable. It usually kicks in for buildings with at least 5 units where a good chunk of them are already affordable.
Evictions. Yeah, they're also super strict in DC. A landlord, or a housing provider as they're called in DC law, can't just decide not to renew a lease. That's not a thing here. You need a very specific, legally approved reason, like the tenant not paying rent or committing a crime in the unit. And the most important part, the burden of proof is always on the landlord to prove their case.
Okay, we've been deep in the legal weeds. Let's pull back and talk about the practical stuff, the day-to-day job of actually managing the building. This is all about the hands-on knowledge you'll need, from fixing things to handling money.
When it comes to maintenance, you need to think in 2 different buckets. First, you have preventative maintenance. This is all the proactive, routine stuff, like servicing the HVAC, that you do to stop things from breaking. Then you have capital repairs. These are the huge, expensive jobs, like replacing the entire roof. One is about preventing problems, the other is about major upgrades. And a great manager knows how to budget for both.
Listen up, because this is important. Handling security deposits in DC is not something you can be casual about. The rules are incredibly strict. First, you can't charge more than 1 month's rent. Second, that money has to go into a special interest-bearing account right here in a DC bank. And once a tenant moves out, a 45-day countdown begins. You have to either return their money with interest or give them a detailed list of why you're keeping some of it. No exceptions.
So, we've gone through the math, we've navigated the tricky DC laws, and we've talked about the daily grind of management. Now, let's tie it all together. What's the big picture here? What's the mindset you need to not just pass this thing, but to actually be a great property manager in DC? You know, there's a quote in the official study guide that I think just says it all. It basically says the guide isn't just to help you pass the exam, but to be a resource for your whole career. And that's the key, isn't it? This isn't about cramming facts for a one-day test. The stuff on this exam is what you'll be using every single day. The test is just the gatekeeper, making sure you're ready for the real deal.
And really, that brings us to the final thought. Look, you can memorize the formulas. You can learn the steps of TOP. But this license, it's about more than that. It's a symbol of your commitment to handling one of the most complex real estate environments in the country. It's about serving your clients, sure, but also serving the community. So passing the exam isn't the finish line, not even close. It's the starting line for your professional responsibility.